Good day, everyone. Our lecture, as promised and agreed this afternoon, is entitled From Raw Data to Findings. The focus is not merely to know the technical terms used in qualitative research. And yes, you've heard me right. I'll only focus on qualitative research because quantitative research necessitates the help of a statistician, and your choice or option to do qualitative research or quantitative research already indicates that you can do statistics. That's the presumption there. But that this presumption is not true for those who do qualitative research. Our purpose is to learn how to perform the actual work, how to develop a research instrument, prepare interview data, divide responses into meaningful parts, assign codes, organize those codes, develop themes, and finally, write defensible findings. Many researchers are able to conduct interviews. They can ask questions, record conversations, and produce long transcripts. However, the presence of many pages of interview responses does not automatically mean that the researcher already has findings. A transcript is still raw data. It contains many ideas, stories, examples, opinions, explanations, and sometimes unrelated information. The researcher's task is to process this material carefully and even systematically. Think of raw data as ingredients that have not yet been prepared. The interviews, focus group discussions, and documents are the ingredients. Coding, chunking, clustering, and thematizing are the processes used to organize them. The final findings are the completed product. So we cannot simply place all the ingredients together and call it a finished meal. In the same way, we cannot copy several interview statements in chapter 4 and call them research findings. This lecture will therefore emphasize a clear movement from research objectives to instruments to evidence to interpretation. Each step must be connected. We will not begin by asking what questions would be interesting to ask. We will begin by asking what exactly does the study need to discover. From there, we will determine what evidence is needed and what questions can produce that evidence. As we proceed, please keep your proposal in mind. Do not only listen for information. Examine your statement of the problem, conceptual framework, interview guide, focus group guide, and document analysis matrix. Ask yourself, are these parts truly connected? Can I trace every interview question to an indicator? Will the answers help me address a particular research objective? This is a workshop in disciplined research practice, and one that matters a lot also. Not simply a lecture on research vocabulary. So, what is the in biggest misconception in qualitative research? The biggest misconception among beginning qualitative researchers is the belief that data analysis begins only after data collection. They imagine the process this way. First, conduct all interviews. Second, transcribe the responses. And third, begin looking for themes. This appears logical, but it is incomplete. In reality, analysis begins before the first interview. It begins when the researcher decides what the study intends to investigate, how the central concept will be divided, what indicators will represent each dimension, and what evidence must be collected. The instrument already establishes the direction of the analysis. Therefore, a weak interview guide produces weak data even when the interviews are conducted properly. For example, suppose your study examines the training capability of an organization. You ask only, what can you say about your training? The respondent may discuss schedules, instructors, personal experiences, allowances, food, venue, foreign partners, or unrelated organizational concerns. The answer may be lengthy, but analytically difficult to use because the question was too broad. A stronger instrument divides training capability into indicators. This may include curriculum, instructor competence, training frequency, simulation exercises, assessment, and certification. The researcher then asks separate questions about each indicator. Now, the responses become more focused and comparable. You can compare what different participants said about curriculum, instructors, exercises, and assessment. This means that your first practical task is to examine your instrument before collecting data. For every interview questions, write the specific research objective, dimension, indicator that it addresses. When you cannot identify its source, the question may be unnecessary or even misaligned. Do not assume that coding can repair poorly designed questions. Coding can organize the data you collected, but it cannot create evidence that you failed to gather in the first place. So, this leads you asking, therefore, what makes a strong proposal? A strong proposal is not simply one with many pages, many references, or many interview questions. A proposal becomes strong when its parts are aligned. The conceptual framework, research objectives, indicators, instruments, data analysis, and expected findings must work together as one system. There are proposals that demonstrate this alignment between and among you. In Panket's proposal, the researcher begins with a concept dimension indicator matrix. The central concept is first identified. It is then divided into dimensions, and each dimension is represented by indicators. Only after this structure is established are the key informant interview guide, focus group discussion guide, and document analysis matrix developed. This gives us a practical lesson. Do not invent the KII, FGD, and document analysis questions separately. They must examine the same indicators from different perspectives. For example, when the indicator is training frequency, the key informant may ask how often training is conducted. FGD participants may be asked whether this frequency is sufficient based on their experience. Documents may be examined for official schedules, attendance records, or training reports. The three instruments are different, but they investigate the same indicator. Barateta's proposal demonstrates another important practice. Broad ethical principles such as accountability, transparency, fairness, security, human-centeredness, and human rights are converted into observable indicators before the coding process begins. This prevents the researcher from using abstract words without specifying what those words look like in actual organizational practice. For your own proposal, I suggest you create a table with these headings: research objective, concept, dimension, indicator, KAI question, FGD question, and document to examine. Complete one row for every indicator. This table that I suggest will immediately reveal missing questions, duplicated questions, irrelevant questions, and indicators that cannot be supported by documents or respondent evidence. The practical rule is simple. Do not ask whether your questions sound intelligent. Ask whether they produce the evidence needed to answer the statement of the problem. A question may be sound. A question may be sound and sound impressive, but still be useless when it does not connect to an indicator or objective. In short, always begin with the research, not the questions. So there are two possible sequences in instrument development. The wrong sequence is to move directly from the research question to the interview questions. A researcher reads the statement of the problem and immediately begins writing 10 or 20 questions. These often results in repetition, gaps, and questions that are interesting but never useful. The correct sequence is more disciplined: research problem, research objectives, conceptual framework, dimensions, indicators, instrument questions. Each level makes the study more specific. The process moves from the broad issue toward the exact evidence that needs to be collected. Let us use a simple example. Suppose the research problem concerns the technical diving capability of an organization. The research objective may be to determine its level of capability. The conceptual framework may define capability in terms of training, equipment, and facilities. The training dimension may then contain indicators such as certification, frequency of exercises, instructor competence, specialized curriculum, and skills assessment. Only after these indicators are identified should questions be written. For the indicator, frequency of exercises, we may ask, how often are technical diving exercises conducted? Are these exercises regular, or are they dependent on available funding or partner organizations? Or what types of exercises were conducted during the previous year? Are the personnel given enough opportunities to maintain proficiency? Notice that every question I just said has a very clear purpose. The researcher is not merely encouraging respondents to talk. The researcher is gathering evidence regarding a specific indicator. When the answers are collected, they can be compared across respondents and supported or contradicted by documents. To apply, take one research objective from your proposal. Identify the main concept in that objective. Divide the concept into dimensions. For each dimension, list concrete indicators. Then, write 2 to 4 questions for each indicator. Do not proceed to the next objective until the chain is complete. The core rule in instrument design is direct. Never write interview questions first. Begin with the analysis framework. The interview questions are the final product of instrument development, not the starting point. Why is this rule important? When researchers begin with questions, they tend to depend on intuition. They ask what appears interesting, what they have seen in other theses, or what they think a panel might expect. This creates an instrument made of borrowed or disconnected questions. Some questions may address the research objectives, but many others do not. So instead, begin by creating an indicator table. Suppose the dimension is equipment capability. Possible indicators may include availability, serviceability, suitability, standardization, maintenance, replacement cycle, and accessibility. Each indicator should have a clear operational meaning. Availability, for example, asks whether enough equipment exists. Serviceability asks whether the equipment can actually be used. These two indicators must not be confused. After identifying the indicators, then you can generate questions. For availability, ask what specialized equipment is currently available? Is the quantity sufficient for the number of personnel? And what items are frequently unavailable? For serviceability, ask how much of the equipment is operational, or what defects commonly occur, or how long does repair or replacement take. Then check each question using 3 tests. First, traceability. Can the questions be linked to one indicator? Second, usefulness. Will the answer help address a research objective? Third, answerability. Is the respondent qualified to answer it? When a question fails any of these tests, traceability, utility or usefulness, and answerability, revise it, or better yet, remove it. The task is to place an indicator code beside every question in your instrument. For example, label the questions as TR-01 for training frequency, TR-02 for instructor competence, EQ01 for equipment availability, and FA01 for facility adequacy. Questions that cannot be coded are likely disconnected from the analytical framework. This simple exercise transforms your instrument from guesswork to into a traceable research process. Before writing a single interview question, every qualitative researcher should understand first the instrument pyramid. This pyramid is one of the most practical ways to organize qualitative research because it shows that every piece of evidence collected during fieldwork should be traceable all the way back to the central concept of the study. In other words, nothing in your instrument should exist by accident. Every question should have a reason for being there. The pyramid is read from the bottom upward. Everything begins with the concept, the broad phenomenon you want to investigate. That concept is then divided into dimensions, which represents the major aspects of the concept. Each dimensions is made observable through indicators. The indicators then generate interview prompts or questions. Finally, the answers given by respondents become your evidence. Notice that evidence is the last stage, not the first. This means that evidence is something you earn through a properly designed instrument. Imagine that your study is about organizational readiness for disaster response. The concept organizational readiness, the concept is organizational readiness. One dimension may be training, another equipment, another coordination. Under training, one indicator could be frequency of simulation exercises. From the indicator, you derive interview prompts such as how often are simulation exercises conducted or what usually prevents these exercises from happening. The participants' answers become the evidence that will later be coded and analyzed. Every answer can therefore be traced back to a specific indicator, dimension, and concept. This traceability is extremely important during proposal defense. One of the most common questions is, where did the interview question come from? If your answer is simply, I thought it was important, then your instrument is weak. Instead, you should be able to say, this question measures indicator 2.3 under the training dimension, which operationalizes the concept of organizational readiness. That answer demonstrates methodological discipline. Draw this pyramid for your study. At the bottom, write your central concept. Above it, write all the dimensions. Under each dimension, list the indicators. Then write at least 2 interview questions for every indicators. Finally, ask yourself, if I receive answers to these questions, will I have enough evidence to answer my statement of the problem? If the answer is yes, then your instrument is already beginning to take shape. Let's dissect these levels one by one, beginning with the concept. That's the first that we will have to look at. Every qualitative study begins with concept. The concept is the main phenomenon that your research wants to understand. It is the heart of the study. Everything else, the framework, dimensions, indicators, interview questions, coding, and findings, exists because of these concepts. So if the concept is unclear, the entire study becomes confusing. However, concepts are naturally broad. Consider the examples on that slide. Cognitive warfare, readiness, ethical AI governance, visitor management, and transportation security governance. These are excellent research topics, but none of them tells us exactly what to ask during an interview. They describe what we want to investigate, but they do not yet tell us how to investigate it. Suppose your concept is ethical AI governance. If you immediately ask respondents, tell me about ethical AI governance, you will probably receive very different answers. One participant may discuss privacy, another fairness, another cybersecurity, and another legal regulations. All of these may be correct, but because the concept is so broad, the data becomes difficult to compare. This is why researchers never stop at the concept. Instead, they ask, what are the major components or dimensions of these concepts? Only after identifying those components can they begin constructing indicators and interview questions. The concept gives direction, but it does not yet provide measurement. When reviewing your proposal, Identify the one concept that appears repeatedly throughout your study. Write it on the top of a blank sheet of paper, then ask yourself, can I actually observe this concept? If the answer is no, and it usually is, you already know that your next task is to divide it into dimensions. Never interview people about a concept that has not yet been broken down into observable parts. This leads us to level 2, which is basically about dimensions. After identifying the concept, the next task is to divide it into dimensions. Dimensions are the major components that together make up the concept. Think of them as the major chapters of the concept. They make an abstract idea manageable, or better yet, researchable. Take the example of cognitive warfare readiness. The slide shows that Pankett divided this concept into doctrine, organization, and training. So instead of asking about readiness as one huge topic, the researcher investigates each of these dimensions separately. By doing so, the researcher knows exactly what aspect of readiness each interview question addresses. Similarly, Barateta operationalized ethical AI governance into dimensions such as human-centeredness, accountability, transparency, fairness, security, and human rights. Notice that these dimensions are not random. They come from the conceptual framework and relevant literature. In other words, dimensions are grounded in theory, not personal opinion. A useful analogy is a medical examination. If a patient says, I don't feel well, a physician does not simply ask, tell me everything. Instead, the physician examines different body systems, respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, neurological, and so on. The human body is the concept, while the body systems are the dimensions. By examining each system separately, the physician arrives at a more accurate diagnosis. Qualitative research works in exactly the same way also. So, review your conceptual framework and identify the dimensions of your study. Then check your interview guide. Are there enough questions for every dimension? Are some dimensions ignored while others receive too many questions? Good instruments distribute attention across all important dimensions because every dimension contributes to understanding the central concepts. Level 3, indicators. Dimensions, whether we like it or not, are still too broad for direct observation. We cannot, therefore, it's still broad. That's what we're saying. Indicators are the specific characteristics that allow us to observe and study a dimension. They convert abstract ideas into concrete evidence. For example, suppose one dimension is training, we still cannot ask respondents simply about training because that word covers many different things. Instead, we identify indicators such as instructor expertise, simulation exercises, specialized curriculum, and assessment procedures. These indicators are concrete enough to generate focused interview questions. Notice the difference. Training is the dimension. Instructor expertise is an indicator. From that indicator, we can ask questions such as who conducts the training, what qualifications do instructors possess, how are the instructors evaluated, what competences are still lacking, because these questions all investigate one indicator from different angles. One of the easiest ways to identify indicators is to ask yourself, how will I know whether this dimension exists? Suppose your dimension is equipment capability. How will you recognize it? Through indicators such as equipment availability, equipment serviceability, maintenance schedule, modernization, and accessibility. Each indicator represents something that respondents can actually describe and documents can verify. So, before leaving this slide, prepare an indicator matrix. Make 3 columns: dimension, indicator, and possible evidence. For every indicator, list the kind of evidence you expect to collect. This simple table will become the foundation of your interview guide, coding framework, and later your thematic analysis. Researchers who build this matrix first usually find coding much easier because they already know what kinds of evidence they are looking for. Only then will we be able to produce what the slide would call interview prompts. Interview prompts. Only now do we begin writing interview questions. Notice how late this step appears in the pyramid. Many beginning researchers start here. But experienced qualitative researchers know that interview prompts are the result of all the previous work. Every interview prompt should come directly from an indicator. For example, the indicator instructor expertise produces several questions. Who conducts the training? What qualifications do the instructors have? How often are they evaluated? What competencies are still lacking? Each question explores a different aspect of the same indicator. Together, they provide comprehensive evidence about instructor expertise. This approach prevents one of the biggest mistakes in qualitative interviewing, asking broad, unfocused questions. Instead of asking, can you describe your training? You ask several focused questions that each target a specific indicator. The interview becomes more organized, and the responses become easier to compare across participants. Another advantage is that interviews become more flexible without losing direction. If a respondent introduces an unexpected but relevant issue, you can ask follow-up questions while still knowing which indicator you are investigating. The conversation remains natural, but it never loses its analytical focus. Before conducting your interview, it is best to perform a final quality check. Besides every interview question, write the indicator code from which it was derived. If you cannot assign an indicator, revise or remove the question. Then, conduct a pilot interview and ask yourself afterward, did every answer produce evidence related to an indicator? If not, improve the question before collecting your actual data. This simple exercise will save many hours of confusion during coding and thematic analysis. Level 5, evidence. At this point, we have finally reached the top of the instrument pyramid: evidence. This is where many beginning researchers become confused. They think that interview responses are simply opinions. In qualitative research, however, we do not analyze opinions in the abstract. We analyze evidence. Evidence consists of the actual statements, explanations, experiences, observations, and documents that respondents provide in response to carefully designed interview questions. Notice what this means. The respondent's answer is not yet a finding. It's not yet a theme. It's not even a code. It is simply evidence. Your responsibility as a researcher is not to immediately interpret what people say, but first to collect that evidence faithfully and systematically. Suppose you ask, how often are technical diving exercises conducted? A respondent answers, usually only when foreign partners organize joint exercises. If there are no partner countries, we rarely conduct them ourselves. That sentence is evidence. Do not immediately conclude that the organization has poor training. That conclusion comes much later. At this stage, your responsibility is simply to preserve exactly what the participants said. One reason qualitative studies are challenged during proposal or thesis defense is because researchers jump directly from interview responses to conclusions. A panel member may ask what evidence supports this finding. If you cannot point to specific interview excerpts, documents, observations, then your finding is weak. Every finding must be supported by evidence, and every piece of evidence must be traceable back to interview question, indicator, dimension, and concept. That's why you always need to create an evidence matrix while conducting your study. One column should contain the respondent code, another the interview question, another the exact quotation, another the indicator, and another the preliminary code. This simple table keeps your analysis organized and makes writing chapter 4 much easier because you always know where every finding originated. Remember, respondents provide evidence. Researchers provide interpretation. Never confuse the two. Your participants do not produce findings. You do, through careful analysis of the evidence that they provide. Now let's look at how you are to prepare raw data. Many students become excited after finishing their interviews. They immediately open the transcripts and begin highlighting interesting sentences. This is one of the most common mistakes in qualitative research. Before coding begins, the raw data must first be prepared. Data preparation is never optional. It is an essential stage that protects the quality and even the credibility of the analyses. So there are three major steps: verbatim transcription, removing identifiers, and repeated reading. These steps must be completed in order. Think of them as preparing ingredients before cooking. Even the best chef cannot prepare an excellent meal using ingredients that have not been cleaned or organized. Similarly, researchers should never begin coding data that has not been properly prepared. The first step is to produce a complete transcript of every interview. The second step is to protect participant confidentiality by replacing names with research codes. Only after these two steps are completed Should the researcher begin reading the transcripts repeatedly to become familiar with the data? Many beginning researchers underestimate the importance of this stage because it seems like administrative work. In reality, this is where researchers begin to develop their understanding of the data. As you repeatedly read the transcripts, you begin noticing recurring issues, unexpected ideas, contradictions, and similarities between respondents. You are not yet coding, but your analytical thinking is already developing. Here's a practical workflow that you should follow after every interview. 1. Save the audio recording securely. Save it in multiple places if possible. 2. Produce a verbatim transcript. There are already AIs that can transcribe audio recordings verbatim, in a verbatim way. Some you have to subscribe. Third, check the transcript while listening to your recording. Fourth, replace all names and identifying information with research codes. Fifth, read the transcript at least 2 to 3 times before making an analytical decision. Researchers who skip these preparation steps often produce inconsistent coding because they begin analyzing data they do not yet fully understand. Preparation may seem slow, but it saves enormous amounts of time later in the analysis. Let's look at these 3 steps one by one. Step 1. Verbatim transcription. The first step in preparing qualitative data is verbatim transcription. Verbatim simply means word for word. Every meaningful word spoken by the respondent should appear in the transcript exactly as it was said. Your goal is to preserve the participant's voice, not to improve it. This means that you should not summarize, not paraphrase, and not rewrite what participants said. If the respondent uses imperfect grammar, leave it unchanged. If the respondent pauses meaningfully before answering, note the pause. If the respondent hesitates because the topic is emotionally difficult, preserve that hesitation. These are not mistakes. They are part of the data. Imagine what a respondent says. Well, honesty, we have a policy, but I don't think anybody really follows it. A beginning researcher might rewrite it simply as the respondent stated that the policy is not consistently implemented. Although grammatically better, the rewritten sentence loses everything or loses something important. The hesitation suggests uncertainty, perhaps fear, or perhaps careful thinking. Those pauses may themselves become analytically meaningful. By rewriting the statement, the researcher has already interpreted the data before formal analysis even begins. Verbatim transcription also increases transparency. If another researcher reviews your work, they can compare the transcript with the recording and verify that the analysis accurately reflects what participants actually said. This strengthens the trustworthiness of the study. Transcribe one 5-minute interview segment yourself instead of relying simply on an automated transcription software. It's a good exercise. Then compare your transcript with the recording. Ask yourself, did I accidentally summarize? Did I remove repeated words? Did I improve the participant's grammar? These exercise teaches you how easily researcher bias can enter the analysis before coding ever started. Let's go to step 2, remove identifiers. Once the transcript has been completed, the next responsibility is to protect your participants. Qualitative researchers often collect highly sensitive information. Participants may discuss organizational weaknesses, management problems, ethical concerns, or even personal experiences. Your ethical responsibility is to ensure that no unauthorized person can identify who provided those statements. This is why names are replaced with research codes. Instead of writing Juan de la Cruz, write KII1. Instead of writing Maria Santos, write FGD03. Documents may similarly be coded as document 01, document 02, and so on. These codes allow you to organize your data while protecting participant confidentiality. However, coding alone is not enough. You should also remove or generalize information that could possibly reveal someone's identity. If only one kernel serves a particular office, writing the only kernel assigned to may identify the participant even without using a name. Likewise, mentioning a unique position, a specific date, or a rare event may unintentionally reveal identities. Maintain a separate master code list containing the actual names and their corresponding research codes. This document should be stored separately from the transcripts and should be accessible only to the principal researcher. If someone obtains your transcripts, they should not be able to identify any participant. Before proceeding to coding, review every transcript carefully. Ask yourself, if another person reads this transcript, could they identify my participant? If the answer is yes, revise the transcript by replacing or masking additional identifying information. Protecting confidentiality is not only an ethical obligation, it also encourages participants to speak honestly during interviews because they know their identities will remain protected. Step 3. Read repeatedly. Only after transcription and anonymization should you begin the final preparation step. Repeated reading, also known as data familiarization. Many students think this means simply reading the transcript several times. In reality, repeated reading is a process by which the researcher gradually develops an intimate understanding of the data before formal coding begins. The first reading is for familiarity. Do not highlight anything. Do not assign codes. Do not try to identify themes. Simply read from the beginning to end and allow yourself to understand the participant's story. Think of this as listening to the participant once more, but this time through the transcript rather than the audio recording. During the second and third readings, begin noticing recurring ideas. You may observe that several respondents repeatedly mention weak coordination, lack of instructors, inconsistent implementation of policy, or inadequate equipment. At this stage, you may write brief notes in the margin, but you are still not formally coding. Your goal is to become immersed in the data. Repeated reading also helps you notice contradictions. A respondent may first say that training is sufficient, but later describe numerous canceled exercises. Another participant may also say, for example, sorry, uh, another participant may initially praise organization, but later explain that the communication is poor. These inconsistencies are not problems. They are valuable data that deserve further examination. As a routine practice, read each transcript at least 3 times before coding. During the first reading, focus on understanding the overall story. During the second, identify recurring ideas and surprising statements. During the third, begin marking possible meaning that may later become chunks. Researchers